Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Coffee Table Conversations. Today we have probably the most special guest of all. I'm going to let Jon introduce himself.
Hi, I am the most special guest of all. Um, that's my title. I'm Jon Selover. I am the artistic director at the Western Stage.
So, Jon, let's start with talking about the pandemic. How have you been during the shelter in place? Aside from working from home, have you been able to pick up any hobbies or new home activities?
Well, um, we actually we're just starting to sell our house in San Jose. Literally, it was supposed to go listed like the day that the lockdown happened. So that stretched out over quite a period of time. But eventually we got that done, and then we bought a house in Lodi, and this is Lodi Lake behind me. And so starting to get the remodeling done there and just starting to get settled. I mean, we have a long way to go, but that's been a big piece to things. So actually, my hobbies have kind of suffered. I have not been able to make a lot of beer, maybe once every 6 weeks or so. I actually have my orchids. I've actually been selling a lot of them because I'm not going to have a greenhouse in Lodi, so the tropical stuff's got to go. And Anyway, so also a while ago, when I made the realization that I was paying PG&E to keep beer cold and keep orchids warm, that my PG&E bill was getting a little out of hand, so I had to make a choice one way or the other. And
Oh, no.
beer won.
Well, now we know who's number one in your heart.
Well,
Speaking
number
of
one
beer,
in my heart is my wife,
do you want to show us your shirt?
Carol. Okay. This is actually beer and Hawaii. That's Hawaiian, Bretta Brew, Kona Light, Bonsai Light, I think. Anyway, I
The
got
only
that.
thing that shirt is missing is some Giants reference.
Okay, well, see, I had this all covered, so here goes Giants for you.
Uh,
Of
of
course, it'll be
course.
backwards, but Kruk, Kite, John, and Dave.
Love it. Okay, everything's covered. Everything Jon loves. So let's talk about work. Tell us about what is an artistic director for a theater like ours. What exactly does that job entail? What's your responsibility?
Well, the artistic director is the boss, so everybody reports ultimately to the artistic director. I mean, I guess the most visible thing is the picking the titles for the subscription season, the plays and musicals, and after that, the creative teams that will do the work, the directors and the designers, and the casting. You know, that's the most visible, but and I guess kind of the most romantic, the most exciting. But I mean, I'm a college administrator, so there's budget and a lot of that kind of fun stuff also. I mean, because all of the plays are classes, so once I select the titles, then we have to set up which classes are going to support them, who's going to be the instructors. Um, so
Well, since we're talking about selecting titles, let's jump right into the most burning question. I'm sure everybody asks you this. Let's put it out there on record once and for all. What is your process in selecting the titles for the season? What kind of boxes do you have to tick when you are coming up with titles?
well, I wish it was as simple as there was just a series of boxes to say one of these and one of those and one of these, and then I'm done. I have a folder of shows that are under consideration, whether or not maybe it's a review of a show or just the title written down. I have a couple of lists in that folders of shows that I've always thought we should do or things that are favorites of mine. So that kind of gets me thinking. Um, you know, there is giving the audience stories that are familiar to them, but at the same time also challenging. And also some consideration of our participants, of what we can do well, what we can cast well, what we can produce well. There's some things that maybe are a little, would be more of a challenge. So that doesn't mean we wouldn't do it, but maybe not too many challenges in a given season or back to back. I start, I don't know, 4 or 5 months before we have to make the announcement. I start with list number 1 on my computer. I just put together 6 titles and live with that for a couple of weeks. And then that slowly evolves. And in most cases, none of the shows that are on the first list make it to the final one. But it starts to fit together. And usually I get to some point where I say, okay, that is balanced. Then comes the kind of challenging part, because then I have to go to the different companies that control the rights. And oftentimes something that I think we shouldn't have any trouble obtaining rights for some reason somebody else is doing it, or somebody's making a movie, or who knows what. We can't get the title, and then that kind of throws the whole thing up in the air again. Yes, it's a lot of juggling, and I, somewhere in there, when I get down to it, I start to share it with a few people that I trust to, first of all, keep their mouths shut, but to look at it and give me some feedback of what they think of the balance, or if there's something that I'm missing about a particular title. But in almost every case, when I get to the point that it's all put together, I feel it's balanced, it's there. And, you know, and a part of that is the way I feel about casting. So when it gets to a point that we're going to announce it, I try really hard to stop second guessing myself, to say, well, we could have done this or we could have done that. It's the same with casting. And I have to do that for the cast, that once we've established the cast and they've all agreed to the roles, that's it. I'm not going and thinking about, oh, if it only was this actor or that actor. That's not only not fair to the cast, but it stops me from doing my job, which is to now imagine this piece of work with these people doing it at this time in this place. That's what it takes.
Aside from the administrative side of this position, you also get some opportunities to be creative. So talk about in what ways do you get to be creative?
Well, directing plays is probably my central creative expression. I usually do 1 show a year, occasionally 2, and I think one time I actually did 3 shows. And oftentimes I know which one it is that I'm going to do. You know, when I pick, there's one that's mine. I'm not going to let anybody else do it. So there's that. Then going into that whole process of starting the design work with the designers, the preliminary work, talk about what the show should look like and how I'm going to stage it, and then start working with the cast and creating it. I mean, you know, you get a script and it tells you when somebody enters and when somebody exits, and sometimes there's a little more description, you know, they cross downstage or whatever. But really, it's just a world of possibilities. And until you go into the room and you start working with the actors, you don't really know. I have ideas, I have concept, but all of it's really, none of the creative stuff really means anything until we all get together and start to do the work. And that's first, you know, just with the directors and the cast. And then when you start to move into the technical rehearsals, and you start to add the design elements, the costumes, the scenery, the lights, the sound, the orchestra. It's all part of the creative process. I mean, you're making compromises, which is what the creative process comes down to all the time. You're having to decide, is that good enough? And most of the time you have to say, yeah, that's good enough. Let's move on to the next problem. That's, you know, I mean, the play selection process itself is creative. The putting together, casting those teams, and it's all part of the creative process.
So you have been our artistic director for 19 years, is that right?
That's right.
Let's go back to where it all started. How did you first come to the Western stage?
It was 1984, and I was at Cal State Chico. I had gone there for just a year to finally finish my bachelor's degree after 10 years at it and 5 colleges. And I was in Los Angeles for some regional auditions for grad school, and some other Chico friends were going to audition for this theater company, this summer theater company in Salinas. And since I was there, and somebody was my ride, so I just kind of crashed the audition. I said, "I'm not signed up, but I'm here, so I'm going to audition." It was for Ron Danko, the original artistic director, and I got cast for the summer. And at that time, when you got cast, it just meant you were in some shows. You had to actually show up and then had auditions, and the directors cast people. So I went home and got my family's fifth wheel trailer, and hooked it up to the truck and brought it down to Salinas, and behind campus, some houses that belonged to the college that they used to call the football housing, which during the summer when there's no football, the Western stage actors would live in the football housing. So I backed the trailer into the driveway of one of the football houses and rented out a couple of beds to a couple of other actors to make ends meet, and spent the summer in Salinas. And I was in a production of Fiddler on the Roof, Broadway, Mice and Men, and Richard III. That was the 4 shows. They actually did, I think we did 10 shows. That was the 10th anniversary of the Western stage. And
So
then
you started. Go
yes,
ahead.
I started as an actor.
Yes.
And
Do
then
you have any memorable moments as an actor? Anything, any interesting, crazy, weird? I don't
well,
know.
probably the coolest thing was, so Mice and Men, obviously set in the Salinas Valley, and in Hartnell College and the Western Stage is like 5 blocks from the house John Steinbeck grew up in. It's the beginning and end of the novel is on the banks of the Salinas River. So a childhood friend of John Steinbeck's, Bill Hargis, took some of the cast up in his private plane, and we flew down the valley along the river, and he landed at one of the ranches that John had worked on. And this friend said that the ranch from Mice and Men was based on this particular ranch, and we got to walk around, and then we went down to the Salinas River. I mean, just having that experience of being literally at the place, at the setting where a story was written was really remarkable. And all of the Steinbeck connection. I loved to read. I had read lots of John Steinbeck, and somehow it hadn't connected with me until I got there that Salinas was Steinbeck's hometown. So that was the coolest part of that year. The less cool part I remember was we did our production of Richard III, and for Sunday matinees, there were more of us on stage for the big battle than there were in the audience. The big fight scene was really elaborate. I mean, a number of us, we'd go across the stage as one character and get mortally wounded and go off stage and switch to be the other army to come back on with a different weapon.
Wow.
And our motto, our cry before we would begin this battle every time was, "It won't be pleasant." And it wasn't. But I met lots of people. David Parker was in that first season. Bill Wallach was both an actor and a director that season. Keith Farley, who was one of the creators of Bat Boy the Musical, was there that season. Red Houston I met, and obviously Ron Danko and Mark Shillstone. And so I didn't realize it at the time, but the hook was set. And I was going to spend the next 35 years with some association with the Western Stage in Salinas.
So after your time as an actor, at some point you transitioned to stage management. How did that happen?
So after that summer, through a bunch of convoluted process, I ended up going to San Jose State for my master's degree. And it was an MFA program with an emphasis in performance. And there were two tracks, either acting or directing. And I had to make a choice. I was still going to be able to do the other, if I was just going to be an actor, I could still direct. If I was going to be a director, I could still act, but the emphasis. And mostly from a practical standpoint, having been involved in theater at that point for over 10 years, realizing that maybe, being an actor wasn't the best career track for making a living. And I had done a lot of production work as a kid too. I mean, kind of always. My high school group, everybody did everything. So I had done stage management and helped paint scenery and hang lights and done all of that. So I went into grad school, and that first year at San Jose State, actually, we hosted the American College Theater Festival. And I met the new artistic director of the Western Stage, Tom Humphrey, and I introduced myself as a stage manager. And I applied to be a stage manager, and I got hired and did the summer season in 1986 in between my couple of years of grad school. And then for the most part since then, I've been in, I think every season since then to some degree. And I went from stage manager to production stage manager to production manager to producing director to artistic director.
So this might be out of nowhere, but where did the ducks come in? Where did the duck thing come from?
Okay. And actually there's a picture that we can put here.
Yes, I've seen this picture.
So it was grad school. It's kind of a convoluted story. It's about comedy. So why does Groucho Marx have the duck drop down behind him on his show? And why isn't it a swan or a goose? And it's because the word duck is humorous. It's why you have Donald Duck. The word, because of the K sound, is funny. So I've always insisted that that's the kind, there's the science of comedy. So I was getting ready to do my thesis project, which was originally supposed to be Midsummer Night's Dream. And one of the San Jose State faculty decided to retire, and he wanted for his farewell show to be doing Shakespeare. So I got bumped off of the Shakespeare, and the only remaining title was this show called Bullshot Crummond, which is I'll just leave the title as itself. And I'm supposed to do this as my graduate product. And that means I'm going to be writing my thesis about this very vapid piece of theater. But, like so many things, you gotta make the best with what you got. So I was just gonna push the comedy envelope. One of the early scenes, there's one of the characters is out duck hunting. So we had a V of ducks on a wire fly across the stage, and they looked so ridiculous flying across that way, I had them fly back the other way. And I had told the duck story, and these couple of prop people took it upon themselves to find every opportunity to stick a duck in the show. And I don't know what the final count was, but it was in the dozens. We had little ducks, which is what the picture is of a mama duck with three little baby ducks behind, like a kid would tug along. I don't even remember. I mean, when he shoots the ducks, we dropped one from the grid. I don't even remember. So that said, I don't know. These couple of prop people put him in, and then a couple of projects I did after that, even as a stage manager, we would hide a duck somewhere. And then that just became a thing that for any show, no matter how serious or how comic, there has been a duck somewhere, oftentimes multiple. Usually there's more than one because the costumer wants to sneak one in, the prop people want to sneak one in, I sneak one in. Ted, the set designer, always sneaks one in somewhere. So, and for people in the know, I mean, especially like when we've done company previews, I know people will come around and go, I saw the duck. Did I see the duck? Was that the duck? Was it there? They're usually wrong. Oftentimes, I mean, there was one show, All in the Timing, and the opening sequence, when the audience came in, there was a bird bath sitting in the middle of the studio theater with a bronze duck standing in the middle of it, there for everybody to see. And I don't know how many people to me said there wasn't a duck in that show. So I have winnowed them down. There's probably only maybe 10 in my house now, and maybe 10. There's probably 20 in my office too.
What about the green room? We've got some in the green room now.
Yeah, well, I've been sneaking them into the green room, and there's a few more that are going to be sneaking in there. Yeah, brass duck, wooden ducks, duck decoys, rubber ducks, dozens of rubber ducks. And so that's the duck story.
All right. Well, let's go back to a question that I should have asked earlier. So thinking about your body of work as artistic director, what have been some of your greatest challenges that you feel that you've overcome?
Well, the challenges, the main ones have been fiscal. The 2008-9 recession, Great Recession, had a very serious impact on the college budget. And at that time, the Western Stage was controlled by an auxiliary corporation, so a 501c3 auxiliary to the Board of Trustees of Hartnell College. So we had our own board, and our own bank accounts. The majority of the money for that corporation came from the college, from the fees for the classes that we would produce. But it had, we were in deficit, and here the college was going in the hole. And so the then president made a determination to end the 501c3, to end the auxiliary corporation, and that either we were going to become wholly a program of the college, or we were going to go away. And there were a number of programs that the college eliminated, and we were on that knife's edge. We had to basically lay everybody off, and constructed, I think, the 2009 season, beginning with, so for the first, we had to make up the deficit in the last 6 months of the fiscal year. So from January to June, we basically had no budget. So we had to produce the front end of the season for nothing. It was horrible, and a lot of people never came back. But we did a production of the Laramie Project with, 40 people in it. And no, we didn't spend any money for the set, and the costumes all came out of the basement. Everything had to be in stock, but it was a really exciting production. It was really an important production for us to do. But that kind of financial stuff is always rough because it's about people's jobs, and that's probably the hardest part of being a manager like this is whether every season, does somebody have a gig or not? And in a lot of cases, it depends on what we're doing, or it depends on if we can afford it. So that's probably the biggest not fun part.
Well, now currently we're in a whole new hard time, I guess you could say. What do you see for the Western Stage post-pandemic? Do you see pros, cons? What do you see coming out of this?
It's hard to see any pros at this point, although I believe that theater as a whole, as it always has, is going to adapt, and there will be changes, some profound and some subtle, because of the new reality. There already is the things that theater companies are doing completely remotely, or with live performances, but by streaming to the audiences. It's going to be a while before people are completely comfortable to sit in a dark room with a bunch of strangers. That's going to take a while, and that's an essential part of live theater. It's not theater unless the audience is sitting together in the same room as the performers. So that's going to be the biggest challenge. When that's going to happen, you know, we've been through so many iterations of timelines that at this point, it's just a guess. Next year there will be a vaccine. At what point it becomes generally available and enough that people are comfortable to sit together with strangers, hopefully in the next year. So what we've done is we've the 6 shows, we've rehearsed one of them already. 2 of them are rehearsing now, and we're scheduling to rehearse 2 more of them in the spring, early next year, so that when that time comes that we get permission, that at least the cast and creative teams can be together in the theaters, that then we can start to work. And I've put together a theoretical, hypothetical calendar that has a week 1 that is that day that we get permission, that show 1 goes in and 3 weeks later is into production, and then the other 6 follow from there. But it's all of the performing art. I mean, it's all of everything. You know, it's so hard to say that somehow theater is, but you know, as bad as any place else, because Broadway shut down and all the professional theater shut down. I mean, everybody I know in this business, and I know a lot of people in theater, have been affected by it.
Luckily, our 2x4 Bash this last summer was quite successful with their virtual content that they created. Why don't you talk about how 2x4 came to be? It's your brainchild. And what did you think about this summer's production of theirs?
So the 2x4 Bash came to be, it was 10 years ago, and we had this swell of young, creative, pre-professional theater people. We just had them in all over the place, in production and in the scene shop and in the costume shop. It just somehow came together that we had, say, a dozen of 20-something theater artists with a lot to offer and not enough places to put them in the season with enough challenges. So, and we had been working to be for more opportunities, more points of entry for younger people, for college students, in particular Hartnell College students, but for that age range. I mean, we are a program at a community college, so we need to be to have to maximize the opportunities for that, you know, 19 to 29-year-olds. So at the time, it became the 2x4 Bash because my original conception was that we were going to do 4 2-person shows. So it was 4x2, but 2x4 is a better word. And then I didn't want to call it a festival, and I didn't want to call it anyway, so many of the cliche words. So I asked a couple of people, and of course it was my wife Carol who came up with Bash. And once I put 2x4 together with Bash, it's just perfect.
History.
And so that first year we didn't end up doing 4 2-person shows, but we did 1 2-person show, 2 4-person shows, and 1 8-person show. So the math worked out. And we did 4 shows, and we did them all in rep, so that the first show that opened up actually played in the last weekend. And any weekend there were 2 shows. I mean, so we were doing changeovers on Saturday afternoons, and it was crazy, but we did it. And then this year, in some ways, because of the pandemic and because of the whole lockdown, that's what that group, this year's 2x4 Bash team, made the subject of their piece. So having to do it on video, you know, it's kind of meta, because that's what everybody, like we're doing right now, that's what everybody's doing about everything. So for them to do their expression of what it was meaning to them, to their lives now and to their creative lives, and a little bit of what would it be like in 10 years. And in the middle of that, while they were working on it, is when the Black Lives Matter movement really came to the fore. And so right in the middle of it, they really shifted their attention to their own response to the racial inequities in this country, and and their experience with it and their reaction to it. And so they ended up with 3 acts. The first act was kind of what's life like now, and then the second act was their own interpretation or expression of about the Black Lives Matter, and then the third act was kind of a look at what the future might bring to the 2x4 Bash and to theater. So yeah, it was a really cool project considering, and they were getting together every day, all of them. I know whatever there were, a dozen of them plus the 2 directors, and yeah, I was very proud of it. I thought it was really cool.
Tell us about what you are currently rehearsing.
So, end of this year, I, for the first time in more than 20 years, I have cast myself as the wizard in The Wizard of Oz. And it was one of those things, the moment that I had the realization that, oh, I should play the wizard. I mean, it just is so, there's just so much. I mean, he's a blowhard and, you know, this whole behind the scenes thing, you know, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. And
Yeah.
there just was too many good things about it. And it, especially the accidental flying away in the balloon and waving goodbye to everybody with, sorry, I don't know how to run this thing. You'll all have to figure it out for yourselves. Just seemed incredibly appropriate for artistic director and was going to be fun. He doesn't have to sing. He doesn't have to dance. He does his 3.5 scenes. You know, plenty of time to switch between characters, so it's no quick changes. It just was, it's like written for the director to play that part.
So, Jon, not everybody knows that you actually directed The Wizard of Oz in 1992. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct. That's one of the second musical that I ever directed with, I don't know what we had, 110 Munchkins. Amazing bunch of people that I worked with, that I've worked with since then. I mean, Kelly McAllister and Joe and Trish and Stacy and Joyce. I mean, it was, and then out of those Munchkins too. I mean, Kyle Richland is in there. I forget all of them. There was quite a bunch. Yeah, that was a very cool production. I mean, I mentioned one of my mantras, one of my credos about once I start working with a cast that I make a point that to say to myself and to say to them that they are the best cast for the roles to do this show at this time in this place, and I mean it absolutely. Another of my mantras that I know because they actually, I got quoted in the 2x4 Bash's final bit, which was my 10 years from now, my farewell, which was in a balloon that flew away. That Nikki, who was the new artistic director of the Western Stage at that time in this future world, was quoting some of my cliches, and so that's one of them. That the cast is the perfect cast at this time in this place to do the show. Another thing that I make a point is with any cast is to tell them that how we start has everything to do with where we're going to end up. And it is so true that the first rehearsal, the first time that we come together sets a tone that has everything to do with the quality of the work when we bring it to life. And I think maybe the most important lesson that I learned, actually, when I was in my acting days, I did a summer at the American College at ACT in San Francisco, American Conservatory Theater. I did their summer training congress, and the high point of it was that Bill Ball, the then artistic director, the founder of ACT, came and talked to us, and he talked about how as an actor, your creative self is going to test, so your subconscious creative self is going to test your thinking brain by throwing out lots of really bad over-the-top ideas at first to test you to see if you're actually going to say yes. And so your task as an actor is to say yes to those dopey ideas, whether or not that's, sticking toilet paper on your shoe or doing it with drool or whatever kind of dopey bit, to say yes to it because your creative self is testing you and saying, okay, well, he bought that. Now I'll give him the good stuff. And I've kind of, over time in my work with actors, in some ways that's morphed into, when I work with actors, I try everything I can for every idea to be theirs, even if it was completely mine in the first place. That they need to take ownership of it. They need to believe 100% in every choice that they make as a character on stage, that it's theirs completely. And a part of this is that if I have to tell an actor what to do, they will never embrace it as their own, and they will always be showing me and everybody else the stupid idea that the director gave me. So it's important that, even like I say, even if it was my idea, that somehow in the actor's mind that they believe that they came up with it and they own it completely. So those are my cliches. Somebody who wants to be an artistic director, learn as much about theater, do as many jobs in the theater as you possibly can. That's especially true with this theater because, most theaters you have all of these other staff positions in production, and we have very few. We don't have a production manager, really. We don't have, we have people coming and going. We have some staff, but so the artistic director really needs to know how to produce plays from the ground up, all the way from casting to subscriptions to selling shows, advertising. As far as going forward with the current state of things, well, I think it's like everything else. You just have to get a sense of what's going on and use that. I think it's important for always to remember, I certainly did from the beginning, that we are a program of a community college. And so the first priority we have is, as an educational institution, that we are serving the students of Hartnell College. That's the first thing. But there's a whole broad range that's opportunities for them to get involved, but it's also the chance for them to see live theater and to have that experience. So you want to have work that is appealing both for participants and for the audience. And then the next step out from that is that we're in Salinas, so you want to be telling stories that are interesting and relevant to the people who live there.
Jon, comment on the irony of, if there is anything to comment on, selecting Mr. Burns right before an actual pandemic. Anything to say about that?
Well, I can't quite say that last September that I could see the pandemic coming, but there were other disasters on the horizon. What's going on politically, but obviously also with climate change and many of the global threats. So that was the motivation at the time. But boy, once we turned the corner into February and March, when I went back and reread Mr. Burns, a post-electric play, and they just started rehearsal last Saturday too. It couldn't really be more prescient than that. And it's not well, I don't know. It's 3 acts, and the first act is pretty freaking scary because it's right in the middle of the post-disaster. And then things turn very feral in the second act, but by the time they get to the third act, they've created their own mythology and their own new way of expressing it. The world puts itself back in some order. So I think that one's going to be, when the time comes, it's going to be really exciting to get an audience in to see it. It's going to mean something completely different than when I selected it. But that's happened, election years like that, when we did Bloody Andrew Jackson, that when I picked it, following what everybody else was saying, that Donald Trump was not going to be elected president. So it was meant to be a cautionary tale of what could have been. But when we got to producing it, he was the president. So it became and he had, the portrait of Andrew Jackson sitting behind him in the Oval Office. So it became a much more different play than it was when I picked it.
And I feel like when we do get the chance to put up Mr. Burns, we're going to be even more informed. We'll have more ideas. We'll be more, we'll just see it so much differently.
Well, we will have been through, the worst of it, because we will at least have moved to the next step of being able to come together again. So we'll have some perspective, at least be looking back to some degree at the worst of this.
That's right. Well, Jon, thank you so much for sharing with us today and making time to talk to us. And we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this chat, and we look forward to our next coffee table conversation. Until then, stay healthy.